Yo guys, what is up? Here we are with another reading video, and today we are on chapter 17 of The Boys Who Challenged Hitler by Philip Hoos. So, as you probably could tell, I did take a little break from YouTube because, one, I was playing my school soccer team and I had practice every day except Friday, and because I needed a break, and now I'm ready to, especially with now that I'm home all the time because of the governor of North Carolina, Roy Cooper, just put a shelter-in-place order, so I'm going to be at home a lot. So I got time to make videos. So, yeah, but I would like to talk a little bit. Most of the viewers who watch my videos are not subscribed. So if you are not subscribed right now, just go ahead and click the subscribe button. I don't care if you watch one video. Just go click the subscribe button, and then you can forget about me. Okay? Just go click the subscribe button right now. I'll give you a couple seconds. Good. Now that you subscribed, let's get right on in it. Chapter 17, Better on the Inside. The next afternoon, Nutt and Jens Peterson hopped down from the Odin's passenger car, took the family luggage off the train, and helped their parents step onto the pavement. As the train pulled away, the quartet began to walk through the cavernous station, finally pushing through the arched doorway and out into the small, sunlit streets of Aalborg. It was May 1944. Familiar streets told of a Denmark that had changed radically while the brothers were behind bars. Shop owners who had sold goods to German soldiers were now, in the old days, now stared through the windows of empty stores. Others stood out front and swept the sidewalks, looking left and right for a German customer. They were stigmatized as traitors now. Exactly 2 years earlier, when the Churchill Club members had been arrested, the boys were among the very few who had stood up to the German oppressors. They had been caught, but not before they had set the ball in motion. Now our resistance was in full swing. There were 8 times as many acts of sabotage in 1943 as there had been in 1942. By 1944, there were so many acts of violence had been committed against German property that Germany declared Denmark enemy territory. Aalborg had become a hotbed of resistance. Residential gardens bulged with buried guns, smuggled from abroad, tooled at home, or stolen from the Germans. Underground newspapers, at last telling the truth about the war, flew from a small mobile concealed presses. Massive labor strikes challenged German authority. Night after night, British planes parachuted tubes of weapons at prearranged spots throughout Denmark. Back in 1942, when the Churchill Club members were captured and jailed, shocking the nation, Germany had seemed invincible. Now, 2 years later, with Norwegian conditions achieved at last, Goliath was teetering. The Petersons walked on to the monastery. They dropped their bags and banged on the front door. A voice rang out, received as an answer, and the door opened a crack. Then it flew all the way open, and there was open arms and broad smiles of welcome for Nutt and Jens. The boys soon discovered that no place in Aalborg had changed more than their own home. Never a restful place, the monastery had become a full-blown resistance cell. Couriers were constantly depositing or picking up coded messages. Saboteurs hid inside the monastery, using it as a safe house. Edvard Peterson proudly conducted his sons through the new emergency escape route. Out through the back door, up the stairs to the loft, where a fully loaded rifle rested at the ready, and onto the coil of rope at the rear of the chapel building that could be used to drop down onto a back street. Nutt soon realized his family had changed too. Nutt Peterson. My mother had become the master of the house. It was she who opened the door when the knocks sounded and you didn't know who was on the other side. Father allowed the monastery to become a safe house for resistors, but every week he put us all in danger. He bleeped the bloody Germans in his Sunday sermons, almost taunting them. The Sunday after a failed attempt on Hitler's life, Father observed from the pulpit, "Well, the devil looks after his own, doesn't he?" His parishioners warned him to back off. They said a full church on Sunday was a perfect site for a clearing murder. The revenge mass execution the Germans typically carried out when a single Nazi informer was shot by the resistance. Father ignored them. He brandished the big Colt revolver given to him by the resistance to protect himself. He showed it off to friends who came to the monastery. Once when he was messing around, it went off, sending a bullet tearing into our bookshelves. It lodged into volume 3 of the 5 volumes in the history of Danish people. The bullet passed only a few centimeters from Mother's head. Action sizzled throughout Denmark. On June 6, just 2 weeks after Nudd and Jens were released from Nyborg, resistance fighters bombed the Globus factory on the outskirts of Copenhagen, halting production of the V-2 rocket that had been hammering London. Days later, saboteurs from the Danish resistance group Borgerlige Partisaner, BOPA, blew up the Riefel Syndicate factory, makers of machine guns for Germans. Jens had his mind fixed on college, but Nudd wanted to jump back into the thick of resistance. His parents worried. To them, Nudd needed rest, not action. The family scraped up enough money to rent a summer house in a small seaside village. Long summer days and evenings with family, walks in the sunshine. That's exactly what the boys needed to heal, they thought. Nudd Peterson. I was totally lost at first. I didn't know what to do. I was as lonely as ever for a soulmate. Maybe even more so because just after I got back, I met Greth again, and I seriously realized I wasn't in love anymore. She was riding down the street on her bicycle and stopped to greet me. I'd spent more than 2 years totally obsessed with this person, and now, strangely, all the feelings had vanished. Where did that leave me? That was what I was puzzled over when, in the seaside town of Hurup, I met a young girl vacationing alone with her father. The old man was sitting on his porch in an armchair with a glass of whiskey, singing. Next to him was his daughter, Patricia Bibby, 17, dark-haired and beautiful. We started talking. It turned out she lived in Aalborg and went to cathedral school. They were British and had been trapped in Denmark by the German invasion. After a day or two, I went back and invited her to the beach. We spent the whole day walking among the dunes and sunbathing and talking. We lay side by side, and at times there was less than an inch between our fingertips. I couldn't work up the nerve to span that inch for the fear of ruining the whole thing. But we talked. That is, I talked and she listened. She was the greatest listener. I could tell her anything about prison, about my actions against the Germans, about my dreams. She laughed with a great laugh and encouraged me to hold nothing back. She made me feel like a soldier, even though I had spent much of the war behind bars. Too young to enlist and with no army to enlist in any way. I would have told her anything. Patricia Bibby had wanted to meet Nudd Peterson. Anyone at school knew who he was. I admired the stance he took, and he was very good-looking. I made a point to get to know his sister Gertrude. I invited her to my house, and found out that the Petersons were going to Hurup for the summer. I maneuvered my father to going there instead of where we were planning to go. It's true that Nudd and I met by chance. Yeah. But I was there on purpose. I loved listening to him and being with him. I found him exciting, alive, and fun. Did I feel anything for him? Oh, yes, I did. He was tall and slender and funny and had an idea every 2 minutes. When we were lying on the beach, he said, I don't know why we can't have suitcases with 4 little wheels. Then it was, why can't we get toothpaste to pop out of a bottle? According to Patricia, Nudd also talked about his resistant experience with his obsession with a girl. He talked about his resistance experiences, about his obsession with the girl while he was in prison, about taking the guns from the German soldiers and going out at night to do sabotage. I was not mature enough at 17 to sense that he was in trouble. That prison had left him deeply shaken. He talked about jail through amusing stories, like the one about the guards who told him to polish his latrine until it shone like your mother's best face. I laughed, but I couldn't feel his pain. Not yet. After the summer holidays, Pat became a daily guest in the afternoon in the monastery, visiting Gertrude. I did my best to win her heart. We visited in my room a lot. I showed her my paintings and produced a couple of romantic paintings especially for her. One night in the winter between 1944 and 45, Patricia's father died, leaving her alone in the world. My mother immediately invited her to move into the monastery, which she did. Living with us changed the whole chemistry. Now she became a sort of half-sister to me, though I was still in love with her. Jens came home from the university in Copenhagen, and of course he fell instantly in love with Pat. That was a given. Anything I wanted, Jens would try to get it. One night, Pat came and showed me a gift she had gotten from Jens, a ring inset with a big green stone. I was unable to speak. My only hope was that she was not in love with him. But I was not going to ask. That would break our code, the way we were. If she had something to tell me, Pat would do so. One winter night, about 10 o'clock, the family heard a banging at the monastery front door. Miss Peterson nervously cracked it open upon a snow-covered young man on skis. He was panting hard. sending plumes of vapor into the cold air. He introduced himself as Carl August Algren Muller, a polytechnical student from Copenhagen University. He had just skied 35 miles from the village of Randers, pursued by the Gestapo. He'd been given the monastery's address as a safe house. Please, he asked, could they shelter him? He was heartily welcomed and installed in an extra bed in another room. The SOE. The Special Operations Executive, SOE, a British covert group, worked with all European resistance movements. Danish resistance activists received British training to carry out sabotage acts. The SOE was extremely disciplined with a very firm command structure. The British insisted on control. The British Royal Air Force planes dropped thousands of containers of weapons onto Danish soil in 1944 and 1945. Danes who were caught collecting weapons were shot on the spot or sent to German concentration camps, where the Churchill Club members were. When the Churchill Club members were arrested in 1942, many Danish police were trusted German collaborators. By the time the Petersons were released in 1944, many Danish police refused German orders and were helping the resistance. It was another sign of how greatly things had changed while the boys were locked up. Ned Peterson. Carl was the resistance saboteur I longed to be. His work began each evening in my father's office when the news service from the BBC to Denmark came on the radio. Carl telegraphed radio messages to the British group Special Operations Executive, SOE, every day from different addresses in Aalborg, though curiously, never for the monastery. The British commander sent coded messages through the radio broadcast, like, "Your grandmother wants a cup of tea," or "There is no more air on the front wheel on your bike." Each message signaled the movement of resistance forces. "Your grandmother wants a cup of tea" could mean, be at a certain farmer's field by 9 p.m. When RAF planes will drop weapons on containers. These communications and the weapons deliveries they enabled were the very lifeblood of Denmark's resistance to the Nazis. Carl had to send his messages at very high speeds because the Gestapo went around with tracking antennas on their shoulders trying to locate where the messages were being transmitted from. Carl was well known and hotly pursued by the Gestapo. Carl and I became friends, but we could not be confidants. He never said where he was going when he left the house each afternoon, and I never asked. I knew that one day he left he could be I knew that each day before he left he was visited by a superior, a guy in a trench coat, who handed him the script for his coded radio message to London that day. At night, Carl and I lay in our beds talking. I hungered to be part of the organized resistance, and I would tell him all my sabotage ideas. One night, we discussed the possibilities of throwing a bomb from a railway bridge. I told him the Germans always had Danish prisoners in the first train car, so we'd have to wait until at least the third passed under us. He just smiled. All conversation froze whenever we heard a car approaching our windows. The monastery was on a street corner, so every car had to gear down to make the turn. The headlights would sweep around the corner, and the driver would shift. Is it slowing down? Did it stop? Lying there listening to those cars with Carl, I was terrified for the first time. The old Churchill Club's actions did not frighten me, but maybe President changed me. Every time I heard the smooth purring private car operating with high-quality gas, I told myself, that could only be one of two things, the Gestapo or a doctor. Our ears were attuned to the slightest sound. The engine stopped totally, we'd have to run for it. So we would lift our heads just a little whenever the headlights passed to try to get a peek. It was so frightening. Weapons drops. Jeez, this is a long chapter. Did I miss the thing? Nope. Wow. This is going to be a really long video. Eek. Okay. Weapons drops. In early 1943, a liaison office in Stockholm, Sweden was set up to link the Danish resistance to the SOE. The idea was to coordinate the droppings of weapons into Denmark. The first receivers were peasants from Jutland, the very northern part of Denmark. Plans were made... Oh, wow, my voice just stopped. Excuse me. The idea was to coordinate the droppings of weapons... Yeah, we read that. Plans were made through coded radio broadcasts. On target nights, peasants waited on dark, lonely quays until they heard the drone of an aircraft. They signaled the low-flying planes in with electric torches and ran up to gather the objects that floated down to them on 20-foot parachutes. They then spirited the canisters filled with weapons away, hopefully before the German soldiers, who could also get the planes, had time to react. One night, Carl didn't return to the room. He never came back. A few months later, just after Liberation Day, I heard that he had been chased up a staircase into a loft and surrounded by Gestapo officers. He shot and killed 2 of them and then put the gun to his own head. After liberation, his body was found in a grave at the military airport. There was a note to his parents. I was called out to identify him, and it was an awful sight. He had been bound with wires around his legs and arms. We brought him to the chapel. A few days later, I was in the car following him to a small village where he had been born. There were flowers all along the street to his family home, and all the Danish flags were at half-mast. Carl Augustus Algren Moller's farewell letter. Dear Mother and Father, I am going to die now, and I am quite afraid, but I believe that God will give me strength to die as a Christian and a Dane in the battle for Denmark. I pray that he will bless you. I believe I did my utmost and would rather die than be captured. They are outside now, and I will confront them. I commit my soul to God. Carl. I later learned that when Carl found out that the whole Peterson family was working underground, he asked his commander to be moved from the monastery. He did that to spare us. The Churchill Club boys no longer got together after their release. Each made his own adjustment. In 1943, Hedge Milo and Egil Astrup Fredriksson enrolled in 11th grade at Cathedral School and tried to get on with their studies. The faculty was divided as to whether to let them back into school. A classmate remembers that on Helge's first day in English class, the teacher, a known Nazi sympathizer, addressed the new boy with the lofty authority in his voice. I think I see a new face among us. Who are you? My name is Helge Milo. And where are you coming from? Nyborg State Prison. The teacher launched into a rant as if no one else was in the room. Among things students heard him fuming about were his misguided youth. Bojan's fellow, the professor, also went back to Cathedral School. Before he was admitted, he was required to swear that he would do nothing to harm the school. Perhaps it was wrong, he later wrote, but he did swear. There was no reason for a Churchill Club anymore, now that the resistance was professional and effective. There was no longer any chance for adventuresome groups of teenagers, Bojan wrote. But he missed the excitement. So went the time, he said, and it was just as slowly as in prison. Egil got off to a smooth start in Aalborg. He was greatly relieved that his family had escaped the Nazis during their attempt to round up Denmark's Jews. Better still, his girlfriend Berth had waited for him. At first, Cathedral School provided a welcome, if unexciting, routine. Then one day a friend asked him if he would be interested in resistance work. Egil found himself accepting. He was taken into a unit, trained to handle weapons, and assigned to deliver sensitive messages from place to place. After several successful deliveries, he was asked to deliver documents to Sweden, traveling on a boat with an old man and another boy about his age. The night before departure, the documents had been delivered to his grandfather's house. Early the next morning, Gestapo boots came thundering up the stairs. Fists hammered on the door, and shouts ordered them to open. Egil stuffed the documents into a shoe and climbed to the third-floor window and out onto the roof, with Gestapo officers close behind. Soon cornered, Egil said a prayer and attempted to leap down onto the garden shed. He missed, shattered his leg on the pavement, and soon found himself a captive once again, this time in a German-run hospital. After the summer break in 1944, Nudd had also re-enrolled at Cathedral School, but his heart was not in studying. Having been in prison at the longest, Nudd was a grade behind the other Churchill Clubbers. He never bothered to take any books to school. Patricia Bibby recalled later. He was an artist, a painter. He was a young man who had translated Milton's Paradise Lost into Danish while he was in prison. He was too old to go back to high school. Nudd's social network had collapsed. Jens was studying in Copenhagen. Alfred Kaj Holberg and Nudd Hornbo were still in prison, though at least Alfred Kaj had been returned to Danish cells after 6 months in Germany. Hans Jürgen was a Nazi captive, surely suffering, if he was even still alive. Nudd hungered to join the SOE-led organized resistance, but couldn't find a way in. He was well known throughout Aalborg as a Churchill Club leader, but resistance professionals saw him as a security risk. These were different days. The new resistance movement was built on discipline. Could Nudd Peterson take orders? Could he hold his temper? Could he function within a command structure? Nudd tried one door after another. All were closed. His spirits plunged. His confidence bottomed. A couple of times his mother called me. Patricia Bibby recalls. He had locked himself inside his bedroom door and would not come out. "Would you please see if you can help?" she asked. I stood outside the door, talking, trying to get him to open it. He had torn his paintings and writings. He said that they were no good, that they were worthless, that he felt worthless. It was a terrible depression he had, and we would talk. One afternoon, Ned went outside for a walk and drifted into a crowd that formed outside the Gestapo headquarters downtown. As he watched from the fringes, his eyes were drawn to the sewer manhole cover and the street outside the building. An idea came to him. Ned Peterson. Remember that in the movie Oliver Twist, London's sewers were broad tunnels through which people traveled. I thought surely the tunnels in Alborg passed under the Gestapo headquarters. I was still thinking about this a bit later when I passed the toy store and stopped to look at the scene in the window, an electric railroad. I got an idea. I bet a toy train with a tender and 3 or 4 wagons loaded with PE2 dynamite on rails leading beneath the Gestapo building might work. That's how desperate I was to be part of the organized resistance. Of course, the rational side of me knew this was a harebrained idea, a hopeless enterprise. But ever since I'd come home from jail, I had tried without success to introduce myself to the organized resistance movement built up by the SOE. The answer came always the same. I was supposed to be a security risk. From the toy store in Alborg, I walked to Alborg's Alborg's city office building. That is confusing. I found the municipality technical division and asked the clerk if they had a blueprint of the sewer system in Otis Street. For what use, he asked. Well, I would just like to study the sides of the tubes. Oh, you think it is like Paris where you can walk around, right? By this time, all the young engineers in the office were gathering around and laughing, but through an open door, I could glimpse the senior engineer in a separate office behind the clerk's counter. He wasn't laughing at all. It turned out he was the chief of the SOE's K Company in Alborg. He knew all about me. After I left, he turned to one of his colleagues, who was also a member of his K Company, and said, "It would be better to have Mr. Peterson on the inside than the outside." The next day, a man came to offer me a command in the resistance. I became the leader of K Company, Division B, Group Number 4. Our job was to move ammunition, weapons, and explosives from hiding place to avoid German detection. At last, I received weapons training, which included taking apart and reassembling the machine. The thing, my editor, and how I do it just went black. My screen. And last I received weapon training, which include taking apart and reassembling machine guns. I learned to use American-made grenades too, which looked like pineapples. I could now operate the things we'd stolen with the Churchill Club. Gertrude Peterson, Patricia Bibby, and Ingrid von Hansen were resistance fundraisers. Patricia Bibby became an effective fundraiser for the resistance, as did Nud's sister Gertrude and their friend Ingrid von Hansen. The 3 girls jumped at Nud's proposal that they raise funds to support the underground newspapers that were countering German propaganda. Together they visited wealthy Alborg citizens, usually businessmen, and engaged them in conversations that ended in pitch for funds. This was they never knew for sure the private sympathies of the people they were talking to. When they, or their superiors in the resistance, sensed danger, the girls were ordered to go underground. We would stay with friends, Patricia recalled. During such times, I would meet my father in the churchyard once a week so he would know I was still alive. We would pass without looking and never spoke. Wealthy donors wondered how they could be assured their money would actually go to the official resistance. The girls offered them a code name, promising it would appear on a certain page in the underground paper, Frit Danmark. It was a secret receipt. Ingrid kept the list in her head, never writing it down, memorized in code. The 3 girls collected many thousands of Danish kroner for the underground movement. This is back to Nud, I think. Our first assignment was to move a weapons cache from a church at the other end of Alborg into the monastery's chapel. It was dangerous work, for the Germans had taken over a school just across the street from the church that housed the weapons. At all hours, young soldiers sat in the window, smoking, laughing, and peering down on everything that went on, including our repeated bicycle journeys from the church, during which we carried bulky objects wrapped in black paper. One afternoon, just a few days after my unit was formed, I got word that a member of our group had probably been captured by the Gestapo. They would try to torture information out of him. We had to move the weapons at once. We started wrenching up the floorboards and pulling the weapons out. We were wrapping them in black paper for transport when there was a great hammering at the door. Guns and grenades lay scattered across the church. The banging continued. One of our people unwrapped a machine gun and took position with his back against the Adler. Another grabbed a weapon and crawled behind the pulpit. Heart hammering, I opened the door. There stood a member of the church choir. It was time for practice, he said. He took a look into the church and knew it was in a flash. He offered to help us, and we told him he could help most by spreading the word that the practice had been canceled. By late afternoon, we had moved it all, including rifles for 35 men, to the monastery chapel. On the evening of May 4th, 1945, I was out onto the street when I heard a radio blaring through an open window. The announcer said that the Germans had surrendered and that our liberation would take place the following morning. I saw people turning their lights on and off and cheering through their windows and dancing and thronging out of their buildings onto the street. Soon our platoon received orders to gather at the monastery. All 35 unit members showed up. We were ordered to sit tight at the monastery for now. Early the next morning, we would take our possessions we would take possession of the Aalborg airport, the Germans' great prize. That night, we carried all the weapons from the chapel down into the drawing room. The strong smell of oil from bazookas and rifles wafted through the parlors and sitting rooms. When we were done, Mother served coffee and Father distributed hymnals. I ended the war at the monastery chapel just a few meters away from the room in which the Churchill Club was born, singing hymns with the men of my K Company group. I was 18. Liberation. At 8:30 p.m. on May 4th, 1945, Danish announcer Johannes G. Sorensen paused in his BBC nightly news broadcast to read a telegram he had just been handed. It was but 2 sentences long. Field Marshal Montgomery announces that all German forces in northwest Germany, Holland, and Denmark have surrendered. The surrender becomes effective at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. 5 years of occupation by the Germans were over. Danes everywhere took to the streets, laughing and crying, dancing and singing. People stripped to the blackout curtains from their windows, burned them in the street, and replaced them with candles of joy. And that is the end of chapter 17. I hope you guys did enjoy this video. If you did, make sure to leave a big thumbs up, share it with your friend, and don't forget, hit the subscribe button. I'll see you guys in the next video.